Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kim Schmidt. I'm the executive editor of Precision Farming Dealer and Farm Equipment magazines. Welcome to our latest webinar, 2026 Datum Changes, What It Means for Precision Ag and How to Prepare, in conjunction with Hexagon. Today's presenters are Chad Hudapol and Luis Valiente. Chad's the Portfolio Marketing Manager for Agriculture with Hexagon, and Luis is the Agriculture Customer Project Manager. All right, we are ready to get started. Thanks again for joining us, and I will hand it over to you, Chad and Luis.
Hello, thank you. So, GPS datum changes. Picture this. It is planting season 2027, and Farmer John uses an N-Trip RTK solution to feed into his precision ag farming operation. Last year, everything worked smooth, but this year, my boundaries have seemed to have shifted. My guidance lines don't line up, and my overall mapping systems are not showing correctly. This is likely going to be related to the GPS positioning shift that may be impacted off of an upcoming datum change. In 2026, a GNSS datum update will create the potential for this exact scenario. This could impact you or your customers by creating position shifts within their precision farming system. How much? That will depend on where you live. Today, we aim to educate you on how to prepare you and your customers' operation to prevent a precision catastrophe. Today's hosts are myself and Luis, coming to you from Hexagon Autonomy and Positioning Division. At Hexagon A&P, we focus on autonomy and high precision positioning solutions that empowers customers to operate with confidence in challenging environments. For over 20 years, we have been working with agriculture OEMs and technology providers to deliver high quality and robust solutions through brand names as Novatel and TerraStar. I am Chad Hudapol, the Agriculture Portfolio Marketing Manager. I've been working at Hexagon for 10 years and reside in rural Iowa and have a background working with growers, dealers, and OEMs. With me today is a subject matter expert, Luis Valiente. Luis is in Spain and has over 15 years experience in precision agriculture and a much more technical background than myself by having his PhD in survey and geodesy. He has spent numerous years working with GNSS infrastructure and PPP and RTK solutions. Today, we aim to educate and answer questions relating to datums and their impact on agriculture. Luis, as a subject matter expert, can you explain to the audience what are datums?
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, sure. Well, in this first section, we are not intending to provide a detailed lesson in geodesy, but instead, we intend to explain the basic concepts related to datums to facilitate a better understanding of the implications of the upcoming datum change in the United States. Here is an initial thought I would like to share with the audience. Measuring involves comparing against a reference. For instance, when measuring short distances, we use a measuring tape as our standard reference. The measurement of positions on the surface of Earth also involves comparing. We determine the latitude, longitude, and height of a point, and these coordinates are referenced to a specific framework known as the geodetic datum, or simply the datum. So datum can be defined as the reference used to measure positions on the Earth. There are nearly as many datums as nations in the world, and they have been modernized or changed as technology has evolved with time. But one common characteristic that all datums have is that they consist of three key components: a model of the Earth, a point of origin, and orientation for that model, and a set of control points that realize the datum. So let's talk about the first one, a model of the Earth. A model of the Earth is simply a mathematical representation that closely approximates the shape and size of the Earth. And because the Earth is not the perfect sphere, but it is slightly flattened at the poles, we use something called the ellipsoid for this purpose. Now that we have this representation of the Earth, this mathematical model, it is necessary to position and orient it with accuracy in relation to the actual Earth. And for that, the center of the Earth is determined with high accuracy, so the center of our model will match it. And for the orientation, we use the axis of rotation and a reference meridian. This requires the use of advanced techniques in astronomy and geodesy that have been refined with time thanks to the advancements of science and technology. And finally, we need to make the datum accessible to the users. And for that, survey markers have been used historically to physically realize datums. This required a manual process of surveying to give coordinates to each control point, and also manual upkeep. With the advent of the GPS technology, permanent GPS reference stations have been installed across the country. These stations operate 24/7, tracking signals from satellites. This information is used to compute not only their coordinates, but also their movement as a consequence of the tectonic plates motion or events such as earthquakes. In the United States, there is a nationwide network of permanent GPS stations, also known CORS. This network is led by the National Oceanics and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and is known as the NCN, the NOAA CORS network. NCN today consists of more than 2,000 GPS reference stations spread across the country and operating 24/7. The NCN is a joint effort from nearly 250 partners that own and operate and maintain those stations. These partners include mainly state agencies, such as departments of transportation that operate their own RTK networks, but also research organizations, such as universities or UNAFCO, and also commercial partners. For example, SmartNet RTK network from Hexagon in North America is a partner of the NOAA CORS network. Now that we have a basic understanding of what datums are, let's talk about how they are used in agriculture. Chad, back to you.
Before we get on to myself, are there any questions relating to what datums are? Datums in agriculture. In modern agriculture, GNSS technology is fundamental to numerous applications. That includes auto steering, field mapping, section control, variable rate technology, and many more. Of course, don't forget about the future of autonomous tractors, robots, and implements. And geodetic datums are an intrinsic part of the GNSS technology. Let's see how. So how does data flow between the systems? Well, step one, satellites send signals that provide their location and timing data to the receiver. Step two, if a correction source is active, it provides data that removes errors in the local atmosphere to increase accuracy. Step three, the receiver computes its position in relation to the satellites and applies that correction data. And step four, the display uses the supplied data files from the farm management software and other data sources and requests position data from the receiver to complete the desired tasks. So the field computer would be the interactive display in the tractor or combine that all the maps that you're creating in the field are displaying on. Today, most GNSS receivers are using multiple constellations of GNSS satellites, each with its own geodetic data. So GPS utilizes WGS-84, GLONASS, PZ-90, Galileo, BeiDou, each uses their own. Additionally, the correction sources come from multiple different datums as well, WAS, RTK, and PPP. Precision ag systems use data such as field boundaries, reference lines, or prescription maps. The datum data for these is included in the files. Sometimes it is NAD83. Sometimes it is set to WGS84. Oftentimes, those are the default systems that most operations are utilizing. GNSS receivers and precision ag systems are able to handle all these datums at the same time, delivering a consistent positioning to what farmers need in the field. So far, so good, but something's changing. So what is changing? Luis, can you take us through what is changing?
Sure. Let's start talking with what is changing. Actually, there are several things changing, but what has a real impact on farmers and agriculture is the introduction of a new horizontal datum replacing the existing NAT 83. This is what is really creating the impact and the reason why we are here today. And as mentioned before, datums are modernized with time because the different techniques are advancing with time and they are refined. In this case, the new datum is expected to provide several benefits. The main ones are improved accuracy, enhance responsiveness when the control points change their position because they really move. Remember, we mentioned before the tectonic plates movements, but also earthquakes. So now with reference stations and realizing the new datum, these changes will be accounted faster. The agency responsible for this change is the National Geodetic Survey. That's a NOAA agency whose mission is to define, maintain, and provide access to the National Space Reference System. The NSRS is a consistent coordinate system that defines the latitude, longitude, height, scale, gravity, orientation, and even the shoreline through the United States. And it is designed to meet the nation's economic, social, and environmental needs. So as you can see, this goes beyond agriculture. This has a far wider reach than just agriculture. And as for when, users won't be affected until mid-2026 at earliest. But this is not starting now. This process already started back in 2020. If you remember that year, we all were talking about COVID and other things, but something else was happening. In this case, a first Federal Register notice was issued by NGS informing about the upcoming NSRS updates and changes. Then last year in 2024, there was a second Federal Register notice that updated the schedules and the information on this change. And for the period of 24-26, we are expecting that NGS will roll out and test all the NSRS main components. And that includes the new horizontal datums and the new vertical datums. Again, going back to agriculture, and our main interest is the horizontal datums. We are talking about NAT 83 as the existing datum and the NATRF 22 as the upcoming new datum. This is what really has more interest for us. And as final or for the completion of the process, the end of the NSRS test will be expected for the first half of 2026. There will be a new Federal Register notice from the NGS informing of the final rollout and of the components of the NSRS, and that will be the trigger to start a several-month transition process. That's when the existing datum today and the new datum will be living together, and users will be able to adapt themselves to the new changes. So, any question or comment about that before we change the topic?
Nothing's
Or to
coming
you,
yet.
Chuck?
All right. So how will farmers be impacted? In summary, right away up front, in 2025, the current growing season we're in today, there will be no effect. In 2026, which is next year, we do not anticipate having any impact on growers. And 2027 in North America will be the first growing season that we would expect to see any type of problems. So the good news is we have time to prepare, educate, and essentially have our systems ready to go to have the least amount of impact as possible. Where would that impact come? Number one, farmers using satellite-based correction services should not see any impact. So nothing is changing for satellite-based services. This includes WAS, which is the free government provided correction signal. Also, PPP services, or precise point positioning correction services, should also not see any changes. PPP signals, that refers more specifically to what we traditionally think of in farming as the paid subscription models. that provides a higher accuracy, such as TerraStar C, C Pro, John Deere Starfire, Case AFS 1 and 3, New Holland PLM 1 and 3, really any of those correction signals that oftentimes farmers will have for better precision, better accuracy. Farmers using their own RTK stations, so their own RTK radio with their own base stations, should not see any impact either. This is because these systems essentially are mapped where the reference points are all to their own reference base station rather than through the NOAA observed datums. But any farmer relying on RTK from networks associated with the NCN will have to adapt to the new NATRF 22 data. For example, if you're utilizing a state-owned CORS system, this will apply to you. As I referenced before, I'm in Iowa. Iowa has a CORS network, the Iowa RTN. This would be expected to be impacted in the future. Many other states throughout the main growing areas of the United States have these similar systems. RTK network services within the nation will be implementing the NATRF 22 datum, and they're doing this, as Luis said, to ensure uniformity and consistency with the NGS. So the new datums will become official. The NOAA CORS network will adopt the new datum, and it is very likely that other RTK networks will likely follow suit, as many of the users of these networks go beyond just agriculture, but get tied into infrastructure, utilities, transportation roads, and other uses. The impact on farmers then, existing field files with location data may need to be transformed to the new datum. So those existing field data could be prescription maps, zones, guidance lines, boundaries, or really anything that's containing the geolocation. Failing to implement the datum transformation may result in horizontal positioning inaccuracies of up to 5 feet. How far? That depends where you're located. As you can see on this approximate map that was created, the further northwest in North America, the larger the impact. So how should the transition happen? Receiver manufacturers like Hexagon should add NATRF 22 capabilities to their hardware. This is all in process and part of the roadmaps through most major manufacturers. The display manufacturers will also need to update their software to accept and process this new NATRF 22 datum. And lastly, farm management software providers should be providing instructions on how to change the datum used within their files or the software to allow for the transformations of this data. In many cases, we want to make sure that previous year's data aligns with future data. So this is what much of the industry will be working on over the next couple of years to provide the least amount of impact to our customers. Failing to implement the datum transformation could result into the inaccuracies of up to 5 feet, just like we started this whole presentation off on. Understanding the importance of datums and utilizing the correct tools will help farmers to transition smoothly to the NATRF 2022. So going back to Farmer John at the beginning, if we all succeed in preparing for the change, the coffee shop discussion should be, well, after updating my position to support NATRF 22, everything's working fine. This wraps up our discussion on datums and their impact on agriculture. We hope you have a better understanding of the basics of geodetic datums and their importance to precision ag. The purpose of datums changes and the timeline for us all to prepare. The dealers should be working with their precision ag partners to ensure they can transition and support their systems accordingly, while Hexagon is dedicated to simplifying this transition by offering tools, education, and the resources for users to adopt the new datums. With that, are there any questions that we can help answer?
All right, this time we do have some questions.
Awesome.
This first one came in just after you transitioned the last time. So that question was, will this affect a fixed UHF base as well?
So fixed UHF meaning, I think that's referring to an RTK by radio base station. Is that on farmers? So I believe how I'm interpreting this question would be related to this slide. If incorrect, please let us know. In this scenario, it has nothing to, the datum transformation is not impacted by the mode of delivery of the correction service. So whether it is by RTK or by radio or some other means, that is not impacted by the datum. If this is say a farm owned or a dealer owned network that has been surveyed using its own base station coordinates, and it is not part of any other networking tied to the NOAA. If those base stations are not updated, the users utilizing those base station networks will also not be impacted.
All right. Next question. Will we or should we resurvey our permanent base station network receivers on our tower network? And if so, what is the time frame for that?
I'll let Luis answer this one.
Yeah, so the time frame will be after NGS provides the information on the new datums and the new transformation parameters and basically all the information we need to compute the new datum. And the need to resurvey the towers or in general any reference station, that depends on how that reference station has been operating so far. You should ask yourself the following questions. Is my reference station working in a network with other reference stations, or is that reference station just operating isolated from the rest of the world? Am I the only one using that reference station, or there is other people using that reference station as well? So depending on your specific situations, you may not need to resurvey. But if you want to be aligned with the new datum and you want to have your reference station in not isolated but connected with the rest of, let's say, the geodesy and the national reference system in the United States, yes, you have to have it resurveyed.
All right. This next question has a little of background before I get to the actual question. So the attendee asked or said that they lived through starting with NAD 27 and then switching to NAD 83, and WAS was affected that time. So why won't this affect WAS this time around? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the reason is because NAD 83 is more aligned to WGS 84 as that is used by WAS. But in this case, with the introduction of the new datum is also aligned with WGS 84. So there is some close alignment between those two datums. And the other thing that the customer, this person needs to account for is what type of surveying his or she is doing with their reference station, or well, in this case they are not using reference station, but with the information they have in the files. So I mean boundary lines, reference lines. Are those lines measured using NAD 83? Were those lines using WGS 84? Because depending on what type of datum was used for measuring those reference lines, they may need as well to change the datum, as Chad mentioned it in one of his last slides. Because even if you are using WGS 84, because your data has not been transformed correctly, you probably need to change as well. So you need to account for that.
All right. Our next question is, how will this issue affect single RTK bases? So radio based, I think is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Luis.
No, I
Luis.
think this question is aligned with previous questions on own or private owned reference stations, like a farmer or a dealer having its own RTK station with an UHF radio transmitting RTK through that radio. So again, if that reference station is isolated from the rest of the reference stations, from, let's say, from the rest of the geodesy in the United States, there is no need to change the datum. But if you want to have that reference station connected and aligned with the new national reference system in the United States, you may want to have it resurveyed. It will all depend ultimately on your application and who is using your reference station. If the reference station is being used by an operator who doesn't care about other fields, other areas, because he's just working in that field, and the boundary lines are already matching it, you don't have to change it. You will only have to change it once you want to have it connected with the other reference stations and the other survey marks that you have with the new datum.
Okay, and then we'll just. Oh, did you get?
I'm saying it's really the real world way of applying that is if the owner of that single base, maybe they planted their crop with their own system, but if they were hiring a contractor for, say, spraying, and that contractor was not using that single base, but was rather using corrections provided elsewhere, that would go back to what Luis is referring of why you would want to make sure that everything is on the same alignment with NOAA and the NCN. If you're operating completely independently off of your own base station with no need from outside sources with other correction services, then you'll remain mostly unaffected.
All right. Next question. If any rover utilizes both a radio RTK network and a backup satellite source, if the radio gets blocked for a few minutes, will the rover then shift up to 5 feet if the RTK base is not updated to the new datum?
Yes. So the rover, when this type of receivers use, in this case, PPP correction services to bridge gaps in the primary correction source, which in this case is RTK, the receivers compute the shift between the two datums being utilized. So in this case, the receiver is using NAT 83 coming from the RTK network where that receiver is connected, and ITRF from the PPP service. So that shift is computed by the receiver. If the network has changed to the new datum, but that change has not been implemented in the receiver or the display controlling that receiver or the firmware of the receiver will believe that it is still using to our network using NAT 83. And therefore, the shift computed between the PPP solution and the RTK solution will add some error that is generated by that offset, the offset between the NAT 83 and the new datum. So, in short, yes, you will have to update the receiver.
Okay, our next question, is this issue exclusive to the US or will it affect Central America as well?
So that will depend on the countries and their decision on adopting the new datum. If countries in Central America are using NAT 83, and after NGS in the United States releases the new datum, they also decide to adopt that datum, yes, that will affect those countries in Central America. But typically, I'm not familiar with the datums in Central America. I'm not sure what they are using exactly, but typically each country decides which datum they want to use.
Okay. And then our next question is, will Novatel Smart 6 and older legacy receivers get the NATRF22 capability?
So that the receivers that are not end of their life, so are currently receiving active support and maintenance from Novatel from Mexico, those will be receiving the new firmware updates. For Smart 6 receivers, Chad, you will correct me. I'm not sure if that receiver is still receiving updates, firmware updates. I believe it is not.
I am uncertain on that topic.
But that's something you can contact us or contact Hexagon or Novatel on that specific question. I will get that answered with more accuracy.
Okay. Next question is, this gets into brands a little bit, so let us know if you know the answer, I guess. Is DigiFarm going to be affected, or is it only government-run cores networks? They mentioned it sounds like most everyone else is in the clear.
Yeah, this is one I've kind of tied to this slide that I showed. As they are privately run, they would not be obligated. I do not believe they are part of the NCN. It is possible they are. There are private companies that provide to the NCN that may or may not be published. The aspect, though, I would expect them at some day to probably evolve or transform to the NATRF 2022. And this is likely because most of those private networks typically do go across multiple different industry segments. And some of the segments will likely demand utilization of the new NATRF 22 datum. So it may not happen immediately. They might be on a more controlled timeline, probably away from a North American growing season. But I would expect at some point they would migrate.
Okay. All right. We have one question left in the queue, but if we do have time still, so if people have more questions to ask, go ahead and type them in. In the meantime, the last question we have so far is, what tools exist out there to help equipment manufacturers today with this issue?
So right now, it is not possible to deal with this issue because the new datum has not been published. So this is something we are waiting from NGS. Once they release that information, we will be able to include that information in different pieces of software, like firmware for receivers or software for displays. As for general tools that are capable of handling datum transformations, well, receivers already do that. Receivers, they have their own software internally that is already capable of handling datums, different datums, as you have seen in one of the slides. They are already operating with multiple datums simultaneously on a daily basis because they deal with different GPS or GNSS constellations or different correction sources. And then specifically for software, there are different tools that are able to provide transformations or compute transformations or apply transformations to maps, to boundaries, to prescription maps, anything, any type of file or information that contains geolocation. So the transformation itself, it's not a problem. It's something that it's already being done on a daily basis at multiple levels. We just need, we just wait to have for the, we just wait for the new datum information once it is published by the NGS. And obviously, ultimately, ultimately, what we all want to avoid is having farmers with the need or the obligation of resurveying the fields, boundary lines, or reference lines, because obviously that will be a huge effort for everybody, right? Running the tractors or creating new information. So if we can reuse the information with previous datums and apply proper transformations, we will save a lot of time and a lot of effort.
All right. We got another batch of questions coming through. So this first one is a two-part question. So I'm going to ask the first question, let you answer, and then I'll ask the second part. If we're running a John Deere dealership-owned RTK network using ITRF, will this have an effect?
So the new datum will be aligned with ITRF. So, well, it is hard to say yes or no. We will need to know specifically the specifics of the datum being used, and we will need to know exactly what is the datum transformation parameters provided by NGS to understand if maybe new a resurvey is required or maybe not. If generally speaking, with ITRF datums, those are already aligned with the new datum that is going to be introduced by NGS, because the new datum from NGS is ITRF based. However, one thing that you will need to keep in mind is the epoch, the reference epoch of the datum. We have not talked about this concept here because we didn't want to make this to extend and too deep into the genetic side. But datums are referenced to a specific epoch. Epoch means a time. This could be a year. For example, a reference epoch for ITRF datums could be the year 2010.0 or 2014.0, right? So maybe the ITRF datum used by this dealer network of John Deere is ITRF, but it is referenced to a different epoch from the new datum introduced by NGS. So at least a time transformation will be required for that in order to account for the shift. Remember, tectonic plates exist. That means that reference stations move.
Okay. And before I ask the second part of their question, if the person who asked this wants to reach out to me with your question, send me an email, I can connect you with Luis and Chad maybe, so you can share more.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Outside of the webinar. So the second part of their question was if they're using John Deere SF1, SF2, SF3, or SFRTK, will this have a detrimental effect?
Not really, as long as they continue using it. The different thing will be if, for example, and Chad provided that example, if they have a contractor to create a prescription map for the field, and that contractor is using as a reference an RTK network operating in the new datum, the NATRF22, and the files containing that information that are provided to this person are with the new datum, right? So in that case, even if no RTK is being used here, the information provided through the files uses the new datum information. So that means that information has to be transformed, or the system, the receiver, the display will need to be able to properly process and account for this new datum information. But if not, if the customer is not expecting any type of external information in terms of external files, as I described before, nothing should change. Will operate as usual without any change.
Okay, and then do you expect that all data recorded as NAD 83 to eventually be able to be perfectly transformed to the new datum?
It will be possible as long as you know the reference epoch. So as long as you know when that information was obtained in the field, it will be possible. Because NAD 83 is tied to the continental plate in North America. so it moves. But the new datum remains independent from the tectonic plates movement. So that's why you will need to account for that shift generated by the tectonic plate movement. And the only way to do that is by knowing when this information was obtained. So, for example, if you know that you measure a boundary in the field last year, which doesn't have to be very precise, like, I don't know, mid-April last year, that will be 2024 point something, 0.4, for example. You can use that as your reference epoch. And with that, it will be possible to transform to the new datum.
And
If
the
you go,
key in that is when was it created? So if a user has been using the same AB line for numerous years, and if it is not saved with any data as when they created it, that could be a challenge to make that line up perfectly.
All right, we're down to 2 questions. So the next one is, if we're building cut fill maps and transferring those maps and control files between both Deer and Trimble and TopCon and other systems, will this have effects, and how do we overcome that?
you want to answer that one, Chad?
It really will come down to the farm software management and its capability to transform those files. So technically it will be possible. It will come down to basically that farm management software and its capabilities to do that with all the different file formats that are out there. So in general, I would say that the common ones, it will likely become easy to do, but many of those tools will likely need to be refined to make it much simpler for users. And that's really what a lot of the goal of this presentation is to inform the community, to create the timeline awareness to the timeline of when this will need to be completed.
All right. And then, will existing AB lines and boundaries or prescriptions have to be adjusted for the new datum?
This will depend on what datum those were originally created in. So if, for instance, if they are originally created with AFS 3 or Starfire 3, those would be part of the ITRF datum, and there should be no impact. If they were created with an NTRIP RTK network, specifically one that's an NCN contributor, and in the past, those will need to be updated in the future or transformed.
Oh, the next question. Yes, we are recording the session, and it'll be shared with everyone. So just keep an eye out for that. Can you just add, since you had mentioned, purpose of the webinar being to kind of inform people to help plan for those timelines, can you go back and just review what the target date was so everyone can keep that in mind going forward?
Okay, so the first notice was out in 2020. Essentially now, as Luis discussed on this, the definitions, the rollout and definitions and testing phase is going on. Then the actual expected go live date would be sometime in 2026. It would be expected that there is a period of time where both NAT 83 and the new datum essentially coexist. As it's more than agriculture that's going to be impacted by this. So really all users of these systems are going to need some time to adopt and adapt to this transformation. Anything to add, Luis?
Yeah, I also like to send the message that this is important, but be sure that all manufacturers involved will be adopting the new datums timely. So there will be no chaos. There will be no panic about this. This is a change. We already faced similar changes in the past. Now this is happening in the United States and other countries also happen. in the recent years, and be sure that the tools that you need to get prepared for the change will be available. Obviously, if you have questions or specific questions on your equipment, your software, your data, do not hesitate contacting your dealers or dealers contacting manufacturers for specific information on the different timelines that each manufacturer may have to implement the appropriate solutions for this. But again, this is a process that we will be successful for everyone. As long as everyone is aware, there are no surprises. No one is working today and overnight is changing. And tomorrow you will see the problem that Chad showed the first slide with boundaries no fitting the real position in the field. This won't really happen as long as everyone is aware.
All right. And then related to the timeline question, when will Hexagon and Novatal be ready for the transformation?
So we are waiting for the rollout of the NSR components. As you can see here, this was expected for the 24-26 timeframe. So essentially, we are expecting from NGS to issue or release the specifics of the datums, not only the horizontal datum, but also there's a vertical datum. There's other information that we need to account for that. Again, for agriculture, the relevant one is the horizontal datum. So once this information is ready for publication, and we have that in our hands, we will be implementing that in the next firmware releases that Novatel Hexagon is planning.
All right. We have reached the end of our questions, so we will wrap things up. Thank you, Chad and Luis, for the information. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be made available on the Precision Farming Dealer website in case you want to go back and review it. We should have that replay out to everyone within 48 hours. On behalf of Chad, Luis, the Hexagon team, and Precision Farming Dealer staff, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Feel free to reach out to us if there's any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. A short survey should pop up when you leave the webinar. Please take a minute or two to fill that out and let us know what you thought. With that, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.